The wagon wheels screamed against the rocky ground as Sarah clutched her daughter close. Dust choked the air around them, mixing with the acrid smell of gunpowder and fear. Her husband lay motionless beside the overturned supply crate, blood pooling beneath him in the afternoon sun. 3 days ago, they had left Fort Laramie with hopes of reaching Oregon, following the promise of fertile land and new beginnings. Now those dreams scattered like ashes in the wind. The raiders had come without warning, their faces painted for war, their intentions clear and deadly. Sarah's fingers trembled as she held little Emma, who whimpered against her chest. The child's blue eyes were wide with terror she was too young to understand but old enough to feel. Around them, the chaos of the attack continued. Wagons burned, their flames reaching toward the cloudless sky like desperate prayers. The screams of other settlers pierced the air, each one a knife to Sarah's heart. She pressed herself against the wagon's wooden side, splinters digging into her back, and prayed for mercy that seemed impossible. Then, through the smoke and violence, she saw him. A figure on horseback approached, taller and more commanding than the others. His presence cut through the mayhem like a blade through water. The raiders parted as he moved forward, their aggression pausing in deference to this man. He wore traditional dress adorned with eagle feathers that caught the light, and his face bore the weathered dignity of someone who had seen both the best and worst of humanity. Chief Standing Bear dismounted with fluid grace, his eyes sweeping across the devastation. When his gaze found Sarah and Emma huddled against the wagon, something shifted in his expression. The chief raised his hand, and miraculously, the violence ceased. Standing Bear walked toward Sarah with measured steps, each footfall deliberate and calm. His warriors watched in confusion, their weapons still raised, their blood still hot from battle. The chief had led them here to reclaim what was theirs, to strike back against the endless waves of settlers who trampled their hunting grounds and broke every treaty with lies and greed. This raid was justice, not cruelty. Yet now their leader approached the enemy with something that looked disturbingly like compassion. Sarah's arms tightened around Emma as the chief stopped 3 feet away. She could see the lines etched deep around his eyes, marks of wisdom earned through suffering. He spoke in his native tongue, words she couldn't understand, but his tone carried no threat. One of the younger warriors protested loudly, gesturing at the wagon and the fallen settlers. Standing Bear turned to address him, his voice sharp and commanding. The discussion grew heated, with several warriors joining the argument. Sarah understood she was the subject of their debate, that her life and Emma's hung in the balance of whatever decision was being made. The chief's voice rose above the others, silencing them with the weight of his authority. He pointed at Sarah and Emma, then placed his hand over his heart. He spoke of honor, of the warrior's code that separated them from animals. Years ago, during a harsh winter, a settler woman had saved Standing Bear's youngest son from freezing to death. She had found the boy lost in a blizzard, brought him into her cabin, and nursed him back to health despite knowing his people and hers were enemies. That woman had blonde hair and blue eyes, just like the terrified mother before him now. Standing Bear could not know if this was the same woman, but the resemblance stirred something deep within him. A debt unpaid. Standing Bear gestured for Sarah to stand, his hand extended not in threat but in assistance. She hesitated, every instinct screaming danger, but Emma's weight in her arms and the burning wagons behind her left no choice. She took his hand and rose on shaking legs. The chief spoke to his warriors again, his tone brooking no argument. 2 of them would escort Sarah and Emma to the nearest fort, ensuring their safe passage. The others protested vehemently, but Standing Bear's word was final. He selected 2 younger warriors, speaking to them in low, urgent tones. Their faces showed reluctance but also respect. They would obey because their chief demanded it, because honor required it, even if their hearts burned with resentment. The journey began in tense silence. Sarah sat on a horse with Emma, flanked by the 2 Lakota warriors whose names she didn't know and couldn't ask. They traveled through valleys and across streams, the landscape both beautiful and menacing. Every shadow seemed to hide danger, every sound a potential threat. But the warriors kept their word, guiding them steadily toward safety. At night, they made camp under stars that felt indifferent to human suffering. One warrior built a small fire while the other stood watch. Sarah wrapped Emma in the only blanket they had, singing softly to calm her daughter's fears. The warriors glanced at them occasionally, their expressions unreadable. Perhaps they saw their own children in Emma's frightened face. Perhaps they wondered if mercy was wisdom or weakness. On the second day, they encountered a group of white trappers who immediately raised their rifles. The warriors could have fled, abandoning Sarah to explain herself, but they held their ground. Standing Bear had given his word through them, and they would see it fulfilled. The trappers approached with suspicion carved into their weathered faces. Their leader, a man with a scar running from his eye to his jaw, demanded answers in a voice rough as gravel. Sarah explained quickly, desperately, that these warriors were escorting her to safety, that they had saved her life rather than taken it. The trappers exchanged doubtful glances, their fingers twitching near their triggers. They had lost friends to raids, had seen settlements burned and families destroyed. The idea of peaceful Lakota warriors struck them as either fantasy or trap. The scarred leader spat tobacco juice into the dirt and raised his rifle directly at the younger warrior's chest. He declared that the only good Indian was a dead one, and these two would serve as payment for every white life lost. Sarah stepped between them without thinking, Emma still clutched against her. She pleaded with a passion that surprised even herself, explaining how Standing Bear had stopped the violence, how these men were honoring their chief's command. The trappers laughed bitterly at her naivety, insisting she was confused or manipulated. But Sarah stood firm, her voice growing stronger with each word. She described the chief's mercy, the warrior's discipline, the honor that had saved her when death seemed certain. The scarred leader studied her face, searching for deception or madness. What he found instead was truth so raw it couldn't be fabricated. His rifle lowered slowly, reluctantly. He told his men to stand down, though their expressions remained hostile. The warriors had earned safe passage, but only because this woman vouched for them. As the trappers departed, Sarah felt the tension drain from her body. The younger warrior met her eyes briefly, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps even the beginning of understanding. Fort Kearny appeared on the horizon like salvation made manifest. Its wooden walls represented safety, civilization, and the end of a nightmare Sarah had barely survived. The warriors stopped at the edge of rifle range, knowing they could go no further without inviting attack. The older warrior dismounted and helped Sarah down, then lifted Emma gently and placed her in her mother's arms. For a moment, they stood facing each other, three people divided by language and culture but united by the thread of honor that Standing Bear had woven between them. Sarah wanted to thank them, to express gratitude for mercy she never expected to receive. She struggled for words, finally settling on the simplest and truest, "Thank you." The older warrior nodded once, understanding transcending language barriers. Then he did something unexpected. He removed a small beaded bracelet from his wrist and handed it to Emma. The child took it with wonder, her small fingers tracing the intricate pattern of blue and white beads. The warrior spoke in his language, and though Sarah couldn't understand the words, she felt their meaning. This was a gift, a symbol that not all meetings between their peoples had to end in blood and sorrow. As the warriors turned to leave, Sarah called out. They paused, looking back. She pointed to herself, then to them, then drew a line in the dirt connecting them all. "I will remember," she said firmly. "I will tell everyone about Standing Bear's honor, about your honor. I will make sure they know that peace is possible, that mercy exists even in the darkest times." The warriors regarded her with expressions that might have been approval, or perhaps simply acceptance. They mounted their horses and rode away, disappearing into the vast landscape that was their home. Sarah walked toward the fort with Emma, carrying not just her daughter but a story that needed to be told. Standing Bear's decision had saved 2 lives that day, but perhaps it had planted something even more valuable, the seed of understanding that might one day grow into lasting peace.